Hi, everyone who's just joined. It's Dan Sandink here. We're just letting people log in and we should get started. So once again, thanks for joining, and I'm going to pass it over to Catherine.
Right. Welcome, everyone, and thanks, Dan. So just a quick update before we jump into the first presentation. So the Infrastructure Buildings Working Group is one of, I believe, 9 of the Canada's Adaptation Platform working groups. And about 5 years ago, they all did state of plays. And so now at the 5-year mark, we're doing an update to the state of play. So the Infrastructure and Buildings Working Group has grown a lot in the last 5 years. So we're still figuring out mechanisms to get input from you and from other folks across the country that are working in this space. But if you, so we'll give you updates. We might actually have like a special Infrastructure and Buildings Working Group meeting to focus on the state of play update to be confirmed. And if you hear from Wood or CVC, so Christine Zimmer, Peter Ninrichter, and Ron Scheckenberg, they may be reaching out to some of you to get your initial thoughts and updates on that. So the process is still fluid. We're figuring it out, but don't be surprised as a member of this working group if you're asked for various input along the way. So that's our quick update, and we'll just jump into the schedule. We have an exciting schedule today. So our first presentation, we're very pleased to welcome Ian Pilkington. He is the Chief Engineer of Highway Services at British Columbia Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. He'll be speaking to us today on post-flood recovery and reconstruction of BC highways. He is responsible for setting engineering design standards that the ministry's internal and consultant engineers use on ministry infrastructure projects. Ian started his career with the ministry in 1991 as a geotechnical engineer, and over his 31-year career with the ministry has held several positions, including project manager, director of climate action project delivery, Director of Geotechnical Engineering, Director of Rehabilitation and Maintenance, and he led the renewal of 27 highway maintenance contracts before taking over the position of Chief Engineer from the retiring Dirk Nyland in 2019. So very pleased to have you with us today, Ian. If you want to go ahead and share your screen to start the presentation.
Perfect, thank you. I will do that. And I see my predecessor and mentor Dirk Nyland's on as well. So that's always unnerving when you're doing a presentation in front of your peer, but hopefully it'll go okay. I'm sure he'll let me know. Now I'll try sharing my screen. Do this. That. And can you see that now? That's good.
Yeah, we can see it.
That's
perfect.
Good.
Thank you. Oh, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are in the country right now. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak with you today here. I did want to mention I'm just coming to you from the traditional territory of the Latko Dene Nation and Southern Dakley Nation in an area now known as Quesnel here in the Caribou, where we're just looking at some other areas that have been impacted by climate events in the last few years. I'm very pleased to, I'm going to be speaking about the work that we've completed. This is going to be about the big atmospheric river event that many people have seen in the news and heard about last November, which impacted our highway system and actually all of our transportation system, both highways and railways, and basically shut down movement from the rest of the country out to the West Coast for many weeks in late November. And I'm going to go through the work that's been done to basically, I want to describe, because many people have seen the odd photos, but I thought it'd be handy for people to see what had happened, what we've done to get goods and people moving again, and then what we're going to do as part of the permanent repairs to account for climate change. So starting with this first image, this is Highway 8, which is 14 kilometers east of Spence's Bridge. This section of highway experienced a 1 kilometer washout that resulted in the loss of both lanes of the highway. It is one of over 60 sites that were actually created between November 15th and 17th. And since this event, when it occurred, there's been a massive mobilization of people and equipment, and our contractors quickly set out to work with the ministry engineers, the project managers, operations staff to assess the damage and formulate a plan for reinstating the highways. So I'll share some before and after photos and then some of the impacted locations and talk about what we're doing now as part of the response phase. Hopefully my slides changed, I hope, and there's a new photo up there. Perfect, okay. So I'm going to start with Fraser 1. This is Fraser 1 in what we call the Fraser Canyon. So Highway 1 Highway 1 in the Fraser Canyon. So Highway 1 between Hope and Spence's Bridge had 18 impacted sites. Most of the damage was caused by water and debris flows coming down the steep mountain valleys. There were 15 debris flow sites, and 3 bridges were impacted by debris flow and high water. Now, this photo is the Nikomin site, which is 30 kilometers south of Spence's Bridge at the Nikomin Community Bridge that accesses the Nikomin First Nation. The Nikomin Creek tore through this area and undermined the pier footings, scoured the north abutment, and cut off the community's only access. So rather than repair this structure, what we ended up doing is we installed a temporary single lane bridge with the goal that we wanted to make sure we can get the people in this community home for Christmas. And this crossing actually opened to the Nikomin community on December 23rd, 2021. And for us, this was an amazing milestone for our crews and our communities. And the decision to remove the old bridge and start over was key in being able to get this access completed. Moving on, 4 kilometers south of Nikomin, this is an area called Tank Hill, and I think many people have probably seen this photo. It's become an iconic photo now, as it really represents how much damage has occurred in this area. The Tank Hill underpass, you can see at this point we have our railway, the railway and our highway is crossing at that location. At this point, the CP rail line was heavily impacted. It was wiped out. The bridge was severely undermined. Culverts were completely plugged, and both lanes of Highway 1 were completely washed away. So work at this site began 12 hours after the occurrence. CP Rail reached out to us, and we agreed that we would lead the work on the site. And with that, what work was going to occur, we were still figuring out, but we agreed we would move forward immediately. And this was about mid-January by the time we got it to this point. The site is now open to rail traffic and as well as open to traffic on Highway 1. So we built up the new rail and highway embankments. We ripped out the tow and U slope adjacent to the Thompson River. And then we installed a temporary at-grade rail crossing with electronic preemption and rail crossing signs. And this temporary reconnection of Highway 1 was completed 65 days after the atmospheric river event occurred. Now I'm going to switch over to Highway 5, which is known as the Coquihalla Highway, or the Highway Through Hell. For those of you that like to watch the Discovery Channel episodes, this is that highway, if you've seen that. So along the Coquihalla Highway, we had 14 sites where the lanes were either completely washed out or significantly undermined. We had 7 impacted bridge structures where the spans collapsed or were compromised by scour and erosion, and we had 5 debris flow events. So the corridor was impacted over a 130 kilometer segment, beginning 50 kilometers south of Merritt to 3 kilometers north of the Highway 5, Highway 3 junction, which is right near Hope. And this is what's known as the Othello washout, which is 3 kilometers north of the Highway 5, Highway 3 junction. And this is what it looked like immediately after the event. The entire southbound lanes were eroded along with a portion of the northbound fast lanes. And the site was further impacted when a second atmospheric river event hit and took out the last sliver of trees between the north and southbound lanes and started to erode the northbound lanes. This is what Othello looks like now. We have 2 lanes reestablished, and the bank has been armored and protected. And this particular repair required a lot of coordination between our ministry, Enbridge, who has a pipeline going through this area, as well as our contractors working in unison together. Approximately 12 kilometers north of Othello brings us to the Jessica bridges. These are the bridges right after the event. As you can see, both bridge approaches were wiped out, and these abutments, like most of the bridges on the Coquihalla, were on spread footings. And these were undermined during the event, leading to the collapse of the jump spans and the erosion of the bridge end fill. Here's the Jessica bridges now. Our crews have constructed a lock block wall and installed temporary jump spans. And the level of effort and creativity and real-time engineering to repair the site was repeated throughout the corridor. On December 20th, 2021, the Coquihalla was reopened to commercial vehicles. And the key to achieving this milestone was that the planning went on, figuring out how we could quickly as possible develop designs and mobilize equipment past the first damaged bridges at either end to be able to keep working down the road and get into the corridor from both ends at the same time. All of these efforts included over 200 pieces of equipment and 300 people working around the clock 24/7. We moved 400,000 cubic meters of fill, equivalent to lining up dump trucks all the way from Hope to Kamloops, and blasted over 130,000 cubic meters of rock, enough to fill over 50 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Now moving over to Highway 8. Highway 8 was and still is heavily damaged. And this photo is taken as what is known as Site 1, which is 20 kilometers west of Merritt, near the Naquatla Recreation Site. It's a 200-meter washout. Both lanes were lost, and 5 Nuatich First Nation properties were not accessible because of the damage. And this is the same site a month later. Within a matter of weeks, crews at temporary repairs completed. After the debris was cleared and preparing the area, the team used rock and dirt fill, build up the road base, and restore this section of the highway. And this is one of the 5 sites where temporary repairs are now completed and safe temporary access has been reestablished. This is another site on Highway 8 known as Site 4. It's about 25 kilometers west of Spence's Bridge. About 500 meters of the lanes were completely wiped out. This is a photo around mid-January, and you can see some of the work that's been done to reestablish the highway. The photo you see in here, we're building rock groins at numerous sites to improve fish habitat by diverting some of the main flow of the water and creating little calm pools behind them to get fish reestablished in there. And what we've been finding that from these making these rock groins, we're actually starting to see wildlife return back into the area. And the team recently discovered a beaver among the woody debris is already starting to make its home again back at Site 4, this one here. So hopefully that gives you an idea, kind of the magnitude of the impact. Some of these photos I'll show just as I'm talking along, just more interesting to look at photos than just looking at me talking. Also on Highway 1, all of that damage I showed before was in an area called the Fraser Canyon, which is north of Hope. West of Hope, heading towards downtown Vancouver, is what's known as the Fraser Valley. And in that area, it was excessive flooding, as you can see from these photos here. But now, basically, all of this, we've got now traffic reestablished in all of these, or at least on routes on Highway 1 and Highway 5. And now we're starting to undertake the permanent repairs. And as we're moving into this phase, what we're now trying to also figure out is what proactive work, if any, we're actually going to do in these areas that were not impacted, but also could be impacted in the future. And as we're doing that, as well as doing the permanent repairs, the question that's asked is what engineering standards should be used to ensure resiliency in our infrastructure to future climate events? Fortunately, this was a question that my predecessor, Dirk Nyland, was starting to think about a decade ago, when this whole concept of climate change was being considered at an international level. So future climatic projections were around the world were being created by international scientists, but they were at a very high level, at like 100-kilometer grid accuracy, which gave us a sense of the future climate conditions, but not to the level of detail that would allow us to actually analyze how climate change was going to affect our infrastructure. We were very fortunate at that time. In BC, as well as all around Canada, a lot of different initiatives were underway to try and understand the effects of climate change. And we, and fortunately with the work of Dirk, were able to jump right in and start kind of tapping into some of these resources that existed. Just want to double check, you can still hear me okay? See, I got a message that auto quality is okay, perfect. Never know with our internet connections in these offices. So some of the groups who were helping us on this, the Canadian Council of Professional Engineers, which is now commercially as Engineers Canada, established a what was called the Public Infrastructure Engineering Vulnerability Committee, which many of you may have heard of, also known as PIBC. And this group created a vulnerability protocol that could be applied to any piece of public infrastructure, be it a water system, a hospital, or a section of highway. And using this protocol, a public body can determine how future climate events will affect their infrastructure and subsequently how to mitigate these events. And I also have on this slide the logo for the Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium, which I'll describe their participation in this shortly. Now, the Ministry was able to tap in and utilize this protocol at 5 different locations around the province to understand how future climate events would affect sections of our highway in different geographical areas, recognizing our province is quite geographically diverse. So we did one of these protocol exercises on Highway 16 from Vandertoof to Burns Lake, which represented the central north, Highway 20 near Bella Kula, which is the central coast, Highway 37A near Stewart, which is in our northwest, Highway 97 in the Pine Pass, which is in the northeast in the Peace area, and so happens the Coquihalla west of the summit, which was where the primary most damage occurred as part of the atmospheric event. And for anyone who's interested in these findings, all of these final reports are available on our ministry's website. Now, from all of this work using the PIBC protocol, we learned that our design formulas and methodology were still valid, but what was changing is the input data. We can no longer rely on our historical data to define our input parameters, such as historic high water levels and maximum water flows. We must use future climate prediction models for our input data to determine the right design parameters to account for future climate events. So this is where the Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium, or PCIC, comes in. PCIC was created by a group of climate scientists at the University of Victoria with the goal of taking these high-level climate prediction models that were created by the international scientists and bringing those impacts down to a 1 kilometer grid level, so that designers could then actually use to determine climate impacts at a very finite level. And we had the ministry had PCIC participating on these PIBC protocol exercises with us to get an understanding of what vulnerabilities our highway infrastructure would be exposed to, and then subsequently what future climate information we would require. From this, PCIC created what was called Climate Explorer, because as they're creating all this data, we needed a way that an average or our designers could be able to utilize this data and manipulate it and put it in their design parameters and into their design formulas. So this Climate Explorer is an interactive portal where designers can go to get the future climate data from specific watersheds to apply to appropriate input on their designs to account for future climate events. And this is accessible to all of the public. So we wanted to make sure as we add more data to this, any municipality or First Nations community or any designer can access this information. So if you Google this, you'll actually see it, and you can actually go in there and take a look at some of the information that's been created. Now, from all of this work, what we as a ministry did is created a policy in 2015 that states all designs undertaken on provincial highway infrastructure must consider future climate events. This applies to new, rehabilitated, or rebuilt infrastructure, such as the work that will be happening on the 3 corridors that we've been talking about today. And if anyone's interested and wants to learn more the details of this policy, it is on our BC government website under technical circulars. It's called T-04/19, Resilient Infrastructure Engineering Design Adaptation to the Impacts of Climate Change and Weather Extremes. Now, to assist designers, recognizing that our policy says that they must account for future climate change, but that's a pretty grandiose statement. So we want to be able to help them to actually do this work. So we work with our regulatory body here in BC, which is Engineers and Geoscientists BC, to create this document called Developing Climate Change Resilient Designs for Highway Infrastructure in British Columbia. And this original document came out in July of 2020, or actually the original document was updated in July of 2020. It came out about 2 years before that. The new version is called version 2.0, based on input we were getting from designers as they started using this guide. And this guide is actually available for free on EGBC's website. So again, anybody can access this if they're interested. And hopefully that gives some insight into what the ministry has been doing over these last few months to get our highway network back up and going, as well as consider future climate events and our design standards. And regarding the next steps for all of this work we're doing for Highway 1 and 5, we are moving into the permit repair phase with the design work underway for the 3 damaged bridges I showed on Highway 5. And the permit repair of that remaining 2-lane section at Othello. And then contracts for the repair works on Highway 1 at the 4 major locations that were impacted will go out in late summer, while emergency construction on Highway 8 is still continuing with the goal of getting a connection from Merritt to Spence's Bridge sometime soon. So that concludes my presentation, and if we got time, I can take questions.
Thank you so much, Ian. And yeah, we do have time for questions. So if people want to either highlight your camera so that you can attract our attention that way, or raise your hand, really appreciate that. A picture is worth 1,000 words. So thanks for the tour through the BC highway system. Quite some dramatic photos. Kind of wish we didn't have those photos, but you know, they can definitely be used as lessons learned to tell the story of resilience and planning and what you can learn to move forward and become more resilient. I see Pam with your hand up. Go ahead, please, Pam.
Hi, Pam Kirtland at Natural Resources Canada in the Climate Change Impacts and Adaptation Division. I remember when the PIBC reports were done, I was just wondering if that methodology was able to capture the challenge of things like debris flow, or was that a bit more of a surprise or a new impact that wasn't quite projected at that time? Is there something more we can do to help with that kind of projection?
Yeah, and I'll start. And who does Dirk being on? He might mention a few things as well because he was involved in those early PIVC protocol exercises. But yes, especially in our province, recognizing debris flows is one of our major natural hazards. It was something we were considering, but I know for the climate scientists, they were trying to figure out how to model that. They were figuring out with the change in temperature, the change in weather, they could model high water flow. They were trying to help us figure out how we had to size culverts correctly. The debris flow thing, we knew that debris flows would be especially high intensity rainfall and events and rain on snow events were going to be considered. So the debris flows, it was a identified issue, but I can't remember, and I don't know if you remember, Dirk, if we actually could even figure out, trying to figure out if a certain gully or a certain watershed was going to start creating those particular debris flows. I'm not sure if the protocol helped us do that.
Yeah, we considered, one of the issues that we had was we knew we were going to have some issues on our system. We could sort of say which might be vulnerable, but you can't suddenly decide you're going to change several hundred kilometers of provincial highway quickly. We looked at that. One of the things that we did do, which unfortunately didn't come in early enough for the Coquihalla, was try to ensure that most of our bridge abutments were on piles rather than on spread footings, and that would have helped somewhat. But those are lessons that we're learning and that we keep working in. So yeah, things were considered, but the logistics of getting all the vulnerabilities dealt with in a speedy way are quite difficult.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dirk. I see Dan has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. And I should note there's a couple of questions, or at least one question in the chat as well. So you mentioned at least one instance where I think it was Tank Hill, where there was a CP rail line that was also affected. Is there coordination with the rail service providers concerning climate resilience and future projections and that sort of thing? Are they sort of a player at the table? And in this instance, when you kind of took over repair or design of the repair there, did you incorporate future climate conditions, and were they receptive and to the concept?
Yeah, it's for any government entities out there to deal with railways. It's always an interesting relationship you have with a railway, recognizing that they being here first usually have the first right of refusal of the lay of the land. So far, we haven't done much in the way of, from a planning point of view, planning for climate change with them, even though pretty much, especially in BC, we parallel, of course, we're all in the same corridor, so we keep crisscrossing each other. But during that atmospheric river event, that was it was an actually interesting thing where both of us are out there. We're both have to have an emergency that we need to figure out. And it was a very collaborative effort. And that was actually quite impressive to watch, where we decided at that point, we recognized that they had to get the railway up and going because there was no railway access to the coast. We were going to focus on Highway 5 to get commercial vehicles going. And we said, okay, for us, Highway 1 will get you access in there to get equipment and things in, but step one is get the railway reestablished, and then we'll figure out our road later. So it was a very collaborative effort in the middle of an emergency. But from a long-term planning point of view, I think that's, I'm hoping now that relationship that we've created, we will do a bit more of that, because we do want to talk with him, because we're running into this all our various corridors. Either we're above the railway or they're above us. And we keep interaction with each other. So it hasn't been as collaborative as it probably should be, but after that event where we worked really well together and did an amazing job of getting open, I'm hoping we've opened the doors now, and they're obviously thinking about this as well. So we want to work with them. So hopefully more to come, but to date, no, there hasn't been much planning of that way, but that November event is, I think, opened the door, at least with CP, to start discussing that. And we also interact with CN, of course. So more to come, I hope, and the positive.
Thank you.
Thanks. Lo, do you want to go ahead with your question?
I do. Thanks, Ian, and nice to see you all. I had a question with regards to the fact that, you've done the PIVC assessment. You've also done the circular with kind of the climate projections and so on in it. And you still face some pretty extensive damage. what are some of the lessons learned? What would you do differently, or how would you just trying to kind of having this foresight now of what got broken? What would you do differently?
Well, definitely, and this is something we already changed back in the 90s, unfortunately, after the Coca was built, but we have a policy that all bridge structures near water bodies are going to be on piles. That's step one, and we'll be doing that. We're already doing that everywhere, and that's something we'll be doing for going forward. It's one thing we are trying to figure out both for Highway 5, and we also had a bunch of climate-related failures in the Caribou, where I'm up right now in the Quesnel area, which is also an area that we're looking at. And we are want to factor in climate change to make sure we're climate resilient. I think, I mean, the biggest thing definitely, probably the primary thing is water. We forget how the water is one of our biggest issues, and sizing culverts properly, sizing bridges properly is a given. But in the Caribou, we're noticing that most of the failure mechanisms wasn't plugged culverts or things of that nature. It was saturated soils and lots of landslides. And so we're starting to wrap our mind around that, where our geotechnical side is starting to realize, okay, we're really focused on hydraulics, especially what happened in the atmospheric event. But don't forget that there's all these other things that are related to climate. Definitely slope stability is something we're looking at. And the other thing is post-wildfires becoming a big thing for us. Where we're starting to see, we've had a few places where the fire burns, and we had in 2017, 2018, some significant fires, and we just had this last season. And those slopes, definitely for the first few years, especially if it got so hot that the soils got hydrophobic, we're starting to have slope stability issues there. So I think those are the things we're learning. And from that, we're starting to now tell our designers that if you're looking at in a steep terrain, take a look at the forested area above, and one of your assumptions may have to be, what happens if that forest was not there? What's going to change hydraulically, or what's going to change stability wise? And think about how you'll account for that. The other things that we are figuring out, though, is to try and help our designers, because of course many designers, as they're going down this path, start going off on these tangents, and then they start coming up with some unbelievable catastrophic events. And now trying to figure out, well, we try to do all of this, we go broke. We couldn't build all of these things. So trying to figure out probability of that occurring, and what is the consequence. So some of it is this are we going to have a maintenance issue? Is it some sloughing that's going to come on the road, or is it a potential major debris flow or major event that, yes, this is something we do need to account for. So we're still figuring all that out. It's what I kind of watching what's happening in the climate world and how we're still in its infancy. It reminds me a lot of when we started doing seismic design for our infrastructure, for our buildings and for our structures back in the 80s. When we started that, it was a very new thing, and we started applying it. And I know for us, the Alex Fraser Bridge was one of the first bridges. Every time an earthquake happened around the world, you'd kind of study that, and we changed the codes and we changed things. And so now we're building the Patello Bridge, and the seismic design standards are completely different than what Alex Fraser was, which is also, they're different than Port Mann and all the bridges we've built since then. And I think that's going to be the same with this. Every atmosphere, every type of climatic event is going to help us recalibrate and re-gauge this. So even this November events even changed a few of our thoughts of how to do things. So I think it's going to be a work in progress. It's something for us, our technical circular, we're already wrapping our minds around how we're going to update that, and it'll be something that'll be updated many times as time goes on. But I think the slope stability side, the fire burn stuff, and the fact that I don't think we know everything we need to know, and we have to stay adaptable to changing our thoughts and our designs is probably the biggest things we've learned so far.
Thanks, Ian. So we have a couple minutes left. I'm just going to read the two questions that have been posted in the chat. I think you've touched on it a little bit, but I don't know if you can read it. When putting bridges back in service, are they Band-Aid solutions or for the long term? And then are geomorphological design standards included in the BC bridge design now?
Okay, yeah, so for the first question, putting the bridges back in service. So that initial getting back in service was what we're calling our just recovery mode. So the photos that you saw that I showed there, that was just to get the traffic moving again. Now we're moving into the permanent recovery phase. So the permanent recovery is going to be long-term, and future climate conditions have to be considered. So the design work that's going on right now on those bridges that are basically back to 2-lane, and we're going to put back to 4-lane, they will be designed for future climate events. So we're even figuring out if it's the one bridge that didn't get damaged, we may end up ripping it out and putting in something more robust or longer or whatever we're going to require when we account for future climate additions. So they will be long-term, the future, the permanent repairs, which are coming next in the next phase. Geomorphological design standards in BC bridge design right now, a little bit, not much. I mean, our bridge, we follow the Canadian Highway Bridge Design Code, and we have a supplement to that code, the BC supplement. And it's a lot about the structures and a lot about the foundation designs and things of that nature. But we do have in there approach fills, which have a geotechnical component. Geomorphological component, I think that's something we do need to think, like we don't have in there and our bridge designers have to wrap their head around that, is they're not thinking about as they're building a bridge, is there something that can come down and thump into it? They do design the bridge if they think about debris flows and things like that, more from a capacity and height and allowing something to go through. So it's not written in the code, but I think they are starting after November, starting to think about that and realize, working with our hydrotech engineers and the geohazards group, what other factors should they consider? So I'd say it's not formal, but it's now being considered informally.
I was asking the question also wondering about, so rivers move, right? So often we kind of allow for the hydrological flow, but we don't allow for the movement of the river. So the river ends up eroding or trying to move through the bridge. So I know I work a lot in Ontario, and the conservation authorities have some pretty mature design standards for geomorphological assessment around bridge design and river crossings. So yeah, I'd be happy to share that if that's of interest.
That would be very interesting, because I know with Highway 5, we're looking at, and if you look at all those bridges, if you look at it in an aerial view, you can see where the river was trying to do something. We put a kink in it and plunked our bridge on there. So we are forcing the river to try and go where it doesn't want to go, and it's trying to decide to go back where it wants to. So yeah, I'd be very interested in that, because I know our hydrotech group is trying to figure out, what do we need to do in this area to kind of let the river do what it wants to do, or if it tries to do something else, let it go there and still keep the highway either going or easily repairable is probably one of the ways we're looking at this now. So yes, I'd be very interested in that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ian. I think we're out of time, but really appreciate the presentation and the very thorough answers to the questions. I'm sure there's a lot more that we can learn and that you can learn from this experience, and hopefully apply it all across Canada.
Yes, thank you.
So handing it back to Dan, and we're going to get a quick update.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. And so we have Ryan Smith here from the Canadian Centre for Climate Services, who is one of our active participants on the Infrastructure Buildings Working Group, and always have to have Ryan to come and give an update on work he's involved in. And just a reminder to let people know, anybody who's on the call, all of our participants are welcome to propose ideas for presentations, including shorter updates. Today, we only have one because we have a longer session at the end of the meeting. Typically, we try to have like 2 or 3. So if you want to just give a short update on what you're working on, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, no PowerPoint slides even, you're always welcome to do that. But again, we're happy to have Ryan here to give us an update on the climatedata.ca work.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone. And very good presentation, Ian. Thank you for that. I think it's a very good sort of segue into what I'll be talking about today. Yeah, just a very quick update for me. I'll keep it brief. We have some new information to share on our flagship website, climatedata.ca. So just very quickly, in case you're not familiar with the project, I just got a few overview slides. So firstly, I work for the Canadian Centre for Climate Services. I'm a climate scientist by training, policy analyst by job title. And so I sit at this sort of interesting nexus between where there's some discussion on where we go next, and with folks on the ground, and how they're using this information to make decisions. We have a wonderful service here, which I like to call Dial a Climatologist. Now, that's not what it's called, but we do have a support desk. And should you have any questions about climate change in general, or you have some very specific data needs for your specific infrastructure project, you can get a hold of us and we'll work with you one-on-one to sort of try to help you out as best we can. So that contact info is up on the screen. I'll show it at the end as well. ClimateData.ca is a partnership between a lot of different folks, including HICC, who Ian mentioned in the previous presentation, as well as Uranus, Climate West, Climate Atlantic, CRIM, which is a computer research institute out of Montreal, and Habitat 7, a web developer. And climatedata.ca, the whole point is to try to get you information, climate data, projections of future climate data, as well as historical data, IDF curves, and other sorts of things that are known to be very useful to folks like yourselves, to try to make that easily accessible. And so today, I'm very happy to provide a short update, which is that we have 2 new sector modules live on the site right now, a buildings sector module and a transportation sector module. So I'm going to hop out of this presentation here and give you a live demo. So here's climatedata.ca. Up at the top, we have the ability to select the 2 new sectors. I'll start with transportation. And it is going to be slow because it's a government computer and I'm sharing my screen. And that really taxes things. So here we go. We've got a context piece, an overview of what's happening. We've got some very, very cool co-developed case studies. And this is where groups like yourself might be very interested to plug in future work and help us develop even more of these case studies. But for example, we do have the PIVC protocol assessment of highway vulnerability. So a very, very apt case study based on our last presentation. We've got a number of different resources. For example, we have this really interesting sort of infographic about climate change thresholds in the transportation sector. Thresholds being a very key component of the PIVC process, trying to identify points of failure or points of where, if you have a certain amount of precipitation or a certain temperature that's above what a system can handle, you need to know about that. So our thresholds piece here is really interesting, and it links directly with our analyze page, which I'll show you very briefly in a second. We've got great IDF curve resources here. And I'm very excited to say that next week, so very, very soon, we're going to have future shifted IDF data right here on climatedata.ca, which is going to be huge, as this is something that a lot of users have asked for. And lots of other things as well. Just quickly over to the buildings sector module. Let it load here. Similarly, there's lots of great overview content, case studies, which are designed to showcase how creative solutions have been applied in different contexts across the country. And again, I would love to invite folks to discuss what case studies they would like to see up on this website. As this is brand new, we just have 3 right now. We'd really like to increase our offerings up here. And a lot of really great, and you can see, of course, because the sectors are both infrastructure focused, some of the resources are the same. I'd actually like to go to the analyze page now just to show you what this is. This, in my opinion, this is the most unique offering on climatedata.ca, something that sort of sets it apart from other climate data portals out there. And that's the ability to extract climate change projections based on your own custom thresholds. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So I'm just going to follow the steps up on the screen, starting with selecting a data set and then selecting a region. Now I can choose to browse by watershed, census division, or just the native grids, which is a 10 kilometer by 6 kilometer grid, which is pretty high resolution for future climate model data. I'll use the watersheds just to show you what that looks like. We have watershed and sub-watershed regions for across the entire country. Now I'm based in Winnipeg, and we're experiencing lots of water issues this year. So I'm going to use that as my example, selecting the LaSalle sub-basin. And let's say I'm really interested in the projected number of wet days in a year, where for me, wet day is going to be defined using this custom script at the top here. A wet day is going to be something which has 50 millimeters per day or more of rain. As this is what's been happening this spring here in southern Manitoba. We've had a lot of Colorado lows coming in, dumping 50 to 100 millimeters of rain, which for our part of the world is a lot, and it's been really difficult to deal with that rain. I can choose a time frame using historical data back to 1950 all the way to 2100. And I can even set some other things. For example, how many models I want to use in my ensemble, what kind of RCPs I want to use in the output, different percentile options, and then how I want to view the data, either annually or seasonally or over specific months. Once I put in my proof that I'm not a robot values here and throw in my email address. Oh, that's the wrong email. That's the wrong email address. I forgot. It's changed. It doesn't matter. That was just for demo purposes. I get a message that said, okay, we're on it. And some really, really high powered computers in Montreal are spinning up right now, performing a custom data extraction. So for some of you, you might have, some of the programming skills to be able to do these computations on your own. But this saves you time still, because we're utilizing some nicely distributed cloud computing services that will get this job done in about 5 or 10 minutes. And then I'll get an email with a link to the data. So that is my very brief update to climatedata.ca. And I'll just want to go back to the presentation real quickly here. I would like to invite everyone here on the call to get in contact with myself or our organization, as we have identified this year that we really want to focus our outreach on the transportation and building sectors to promote the work we've been doing, but also to engage further to determine where we should go next. So I would like you to reach out to me. I've got my email, the proper one this time, up on the screen here. Tell me, what are your training needs? That's something that's one of the services we provide, is to come out and do a training on how to use and how to find and how to make sense of future climate data. If you have specific data needs, I'd love to know what they are so we can help develop our future data sets. And we want to get you involved in future projects, submitting case studies and developing future sector modules. That's it for me. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Ryan. And we're just about 2 minutes over time here. I didn't see any hands up for questions in the chat, but one quick question, I think it's related to your data needs statement. Do you get a lot of calls to your call data scientist line? And is there any sort of common themes and requests for data that people sort of have trouble finding?
Yes, folks generally want the ability to do bulk downloading. That's sort of the #1 request, as well as downloading, cutting out across custom shapefiles. So that's one of the services we offer. If you give us a shapefile and you tell us what data you want, we can do the data crunching for you.
Great, thanks. And maybe one quick question from Peter Nimmer.
Sure. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for that. It's really interesting. I'm just wondering if there's any vision to having an API that allow other tools to electronically access the databases.
Great question. Yes, that's something we are considering. Yeah. And we do have the data up on a Threads server, which does make it a little easier to access. And so, for example, you can even pull that into a GIS software system.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Ryan. Once again, I'm sure we'll have you back with more good updates from your group. And we'll distribute the slides and all of that. So thanks again for your time. We've got some limited time here, so we should move on quickly. I just wanted to remind people, one person has taken us up on the offer to post in the chat box any program, publication, workshop, anything that's coming up that you'd like to get out to this group, please feel free to put it in the chat box, and we'll also send it out in a note to the group after the meeting, to the large group, about 120 people. So with no further ado, we'll pass it over to Lo Cheng and Caroline Larrivee, and I believe Stratos as well. Here we go. And I will be posting links to the presentations as well in the chat box. So just keep an eye out for that.
Great. Thank you, everybody. And thank you very much for inviting us to your session today. It's much welcomed. My name is Lo Cheng. I am the Director General with Infrastructure Canada in the Environment and Infrastructure Policy Shop. I'd like to acknowledge that those of us in Ottawa are located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. So if you wish to share where you're joining from, please do that in the chat. Today we have a short update for you on the National Adaptation Strategy, and specifically the Infrastructure Working Group. I'm sure I'm not saying it exactly the right way, but it's some related to resilient infrastructure that Caroline Larrivée from Orenos and I co-chair together. Caroline's going to go through kind of where we're at with the National Adaptation Strategy. I'm going to give you a little bit on what we've heard so far from our advisory committee and some input we've gotten from the public. And our goal here today is really to engage you to see if we're on the right track, also offer you an opportunity to continue to give us advice. This is a bit of a, it's a big deal to try to put together the National Adaptation Strategy, and we want to try to, this isn't just for the federal government; it's essentially for Canada at large. And so we want to just make sure that we're getting out there and getting as much comments as we can on this. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of what we've heard so far, and then we're going to do a bit of an engagement session with some online participation from you. And hopefully you can either, we'll get some input today, but we'll, I think, also get some as we're going through. So without further ado, I am going to turn this over to Caroline.
Merci beaucoup, Lou. Bonjour tout le monde. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. A lot of names that I've had the pleasure of collaborating with in the past, so it's good to see you again, or at least see your name. So I'm just going to go through a few slides to remind everyone of kind of the National Adaptation Strategy structure. I came last fall in your previous meeting to talk about kind of what we had done. Actually, it was the beginning of the year, kind of what we had done, where we were at. So just a quick reminder that the National Adaptation Strategy is really a way to establish an overarching vision of for resilience in Canada. There was an engagement process last year, about 1 year ago, where some key theme areas were identified, including health and well-being, resilient natural and built infrastructure, thriving natural environment, strong and resilient economy, and disaster resilience and security. They all, the idea is really to develop some transformational goals. So kind of looking at the 2050 horizon, some medium-term objectives for the 2030-35 time horizon. And it's really an effort that reflects kind of a whole of society role in terms of adapting to a changing climate. The strategy will also include and define governance structures and implementation processes, including a cyclical design, some monitoring and evaluation that's included, and also reporting mechanisms that help to inform decision-making at large. Just to come back, maybe if we move to the next slide, in terms of the way where we're at and how the public and experts can engage, the ones that haven't been involved to date. So ongoing between April and July of this year, we're currently in phase 2 of the engagement process. And we're seeking really to expand engagement to include the public, but including partners and experts that haven't yet been engaged or been engaged actively to date. So the focus in this phase is really to develop short-term actions that help us support the medium-term objectives and transformational goals that were developed and were validated and discussed with federal ministries, provinces and territories, and other experts. So we're really focusing on what do we need to put in place now to be able to reach those medium-term objectives. There are a couple of key events and activities that we wanted to flag. The public engagement platform is an easy-to-use public engagement platform. The site provides general information out to the public with key and updated information that can be useful in terms of commenting on the strategy. It helps to also gather input from different partners and experts. And it's really a way to provide feedback so individuals must create an account and register, but there's really a way of commenting and providing ideas and feedback. There are also a number of targeted technical workshops, and this is why we're joining you today. This is considered as one of those workshops. If you're interested, please reach out to our team or the team at Infrastructure Canada, and we'll share the dates and other public-facing technical workshops with you. Namely, they can be of interest because they will be kind of cross-cutting. They will allow for more cross-cutting across the theme. So be able to provide input into the themes beyond the resilient built and natural infrastructure. And if we move to the next slide, in terms of the proposed path forward, just to mention that there will be a federal adaptation action plan the plan is to release it just prior to the next Conference of Parties meeting in next December. There will also be federal, provincial, territorial, bilateral action plans, an Indigenous climate leadership action plan, and national Indigenous organization bilateral action plans for self-determined action. Those will happen a bit more in the next year. And I'm going to just pause here to see if there are any questions in terms of the process to date, before we move more specifically into probably the subject that will interest you more in terms of what we've heard to date in terms of actions for the resilient infrastructure. So just pause for a quick moment to see if there are any questions concerning the process to date. And while I wait to see if there are any questions, we'll be posting the links towards the platform, the engagement platform. We'll be posting it in the chat so you can access it. So I think that's good. I don't see any questions. So Lo, I think I will hand it back to you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Caroline. So I'm going to just take us through the top of the slide here. This is essentially where what we've done so far is our 2050 transformational goal. This, as you can imagine, was a difficult sentence to get to. And then below that are our medium-term goals, so getting to 2030. So developing these goals and these objectives, the advisory group members really wanted to expand beyond the traditional asset-based approach. So, the asset by asset, and really look towards a systems-based model that allows us to kind of go across infrastructure systems and look at really focusing on the services that they offer, such as healthcare or utilities, water, transportation, you name it. Because a lot of our infrastructure, that's kind of the purpose of our infrastructure, and it cuts across jurisdictions and ecosystems. So this idea of looking at an infrastructure systems approach. And then we've got a goal, a technical, a policy and legal goal, a socioeconomic goal, a financial, and a governance goal. These are pretty high level, but they essentially give us what we're aiming towards. And so from there, we have been working in phase 2 to develop, and really at this point, we're gathering the short-term actions that essentially cover for the next 5 years. And I know this is a little bit, probably a little ambitious as well in the next 5 years. So take the time frame with a bit of grain of salt. So we have been collecting short-term actions. And what we've done is that we've collected them, we've started to group them based on what we think are what they're trying to achieve. You can imagine, I think we've received hundreds. And what we're trying to do here is group them so that we can look at the outcome that they're trying to achieve. And what we're hoping to do today is to really focus our attention on the outcomes with you, trying to see if these are the right outcomes, if we're missing anything. And I'm going to walk you through one of them just to give you an idea of what we're trying to do here in the long term. And just, have we got the key components of that outcome captured. We can take forever in terms of wordsmithing it, and that's not what we want to do today. It's just really to try to see if we did all these things in the next 5 or so years, would we be that much further ahead on resilient infrastructure? So let me give you one example, and this is the example on funding. This is what we hear very often, that the outcome here is that there is funding that has mandatory resilience requirements. So, and that prioritization is based on risk, benefits, and equity. So so what we're trying to do here is we're going to try to capture the actions that feed up to this outcome. And each one of our outcomes that I had on the earlier page has a list. And what we've done is we've kind of, there's repeats of kind of the short-term actions that have been given to us, and we're trying to group them as well. So, the first one being increased funding for infrastructure specific programs across all levels of government, and ensure that investments direct funding for adaptation or resilience that maximize connections to mitigation and low carbon. So, there is co-benefit there. Adaptation is a priority area for spending, somehow making that a recognition that it is a priority. We also need to highlight the cost of maintaining the current service standards so we can make the business case for adaptation. Even just maintaining current levels in the face of aging infrastructure, as well as meeting the impacts of climate change. There's also a need that we've heard to try to make funding a longer term planning so that there's some permanence to this, so that if somebody is starting to do something that we know we'll be able to get through it, so that there will be support for the long term. Funding across phases, not just the capital. And I know that infrastructure, a lot of our programming has been based on providing that capital, which is much needed, but recognizing that the planning is just as important. And these days, the maintenance phase of infrastructure is coming up more and more as it being a really important piece. Other federal funding for maintenance and infrastructure, that's what we talked about. So this is kind of upgrading existing infrastructure. So can we do more? Can we look at solar panel? Can we look at new construction and wave energy generation? So there's many other areas here. And I've talked a little bit here about kind of the federal funding or federal, provincial, municipal funding. Funding needs to go beyond the governments. So how do we mobilize private funding to finance resilient infrastructure projects? And I had a really interesting discussion yesterday with the cooperatives who are looking to figure out how they can start some pilot projects to put some funds into actually developing these infrastructure pieces, yet still somehow making it work. So also working with the insurance industry to see how the resilient infrastructure could be most beneficial. These aren't quite yet in terms of the language, in terms of action, but it kind of gets us there. And in terms, the other piece that we have in terms of problems when it comes to making sure that there's funding that is there for resilience is monetizing the intangible benefits. This is a lot, if it's done well, it's avoided costs. And you never get, applause for avoided costs. You get the problem. So trying to figure out how to deal with that one. And then this idea around equitable distribution, prioritizing marginal or at-risk communities. This is going to be one that's going to go through across. So how do we prioritize the work? As Ian said, there's always going to be way more work and things to do than there will be funds. How do we prioritize? And our suggestion here is it's risk-based, that we look at projects that give us the highest cost to benefit, highest benefit to cost ratio. And also that we look at equity, the vulnerable or the most impacted. So that piece there as well is important. So we're figuring that if we could come up with kind of the immediate, the subsequent, the ongoing actions that are needed to come out towards an outcome that we're looking for, and I'll go back to the outcomes page before I leave this piece, then that would help us a lot. We've done this for each one of these, and I'm not going to go into all of them. We've got one more example there if we need it, But what I think is going to be more important is for us to kind of just go through these short-term actions. And I'm going to turn over to Stratos in just a minute after we kind of walk through these. Don't worry too much about the number of outcome statements here. You'll see that there's 6. We combined a few to kind of just make this a little bit more. So the first area is around training capacity. Infrastructure owners, professionals, practitioners, and Indigenous communities are aware of and can easily access training to use the data and the tools to develop the solutions that we need for resilient infrastructure. That is a bit of a prerequisite that, you know, things are available and easy to access. A lot of what Ryan was talking about earlier here is trying to get to that point. Then there's this piece where action needs to be taken. Infrastructure owners have completed climate adapted asset management plans, aiming to take a systems approach that is risk managed and talks about service. The other piece here is that all new buildings, retrofits, and maintenance use climate change guidance codes and standards. How do we make this more mandatory? How do we advance this a little quicker than the code process, for instance? We talked a little bit about the funding here. Funding is a mandatory resilience requirement. So if you want to have, for instance, federal funding, there will be resilience requirements that you've looked at this. What are you doing to enhance that resiliency? And then prioritizing, that's the one we talked about in detail. The next one around capital investment support is resilient infrastructure planning, developing, and maintenance is a priority with long-term stable funding from multiple sources. So these two kind of get at that. And then fourth, the fourth kind of bucket of work that we think is needed in terms of outcome is along the lines of resilient infrastructure has a common vision, which we're doing with this national adaptation strategy, has clear roles and responsibilities, and it's well coordinated across the governments, infrastructure owners, professionals, practitioners. So that's kind of our wish list. And I'm going to turn it over to Stratos now to kind of walk us through a little bit of an engagement session with you. There's a lot of people and we wanted to get your input. And just as you know, we have a limited time here today. There's going to be a Google document that's going to be available for you to continue to provide us comments. And even beyond kind of, we're going to try to collect that comment either end of this week, early Monday kind of thing to revise for our next advisory group meeting. But we'll also put some information here of how you can continue to reach out to us and provide us comments in addition to the platform that Caroline had talked about. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Lo and Caroline. And I invite you to stay up here with me if you wish. What we thought we might do, we weren't sure exactly the number of participants that we would have gathered today. So what we've proposed to do is use Mentimeter, which some of you may have used before, in order to gather your sort of high level feedback on this piece that Lo has just walked us through. And so if you're able, I invite you to click on I'm just going to put a link here in chat. You can join us by opening another browser by clicking on the link in chat, or you can use the QR code that is showing here on the screen. And the question that we're going to start with is an overarching question. So once people get settled into Menti, you may also wish to open up the presentation that Dan had circulated earlier today and go to that slide, to slide 5 that Lo was talking about, because that's sort of going to be our point of reference for today's conversation. And so maybe, Sabina, before we go over to the Mentimeter to show sort of where people are at, maybe we just go back to the first, to slide 5, and I'll just orient folks to the first question that we have for you. So one of the pieces of feedback we'd like to get from you is when you look along those short-term actions or called outcomes along the bottom, when you look at that suite that Lo has just walked us through, our first question is how well, if those are accomplished, how well will it allow us to achieve the transformational goal as well as the medium-term objectives? And just to sort of get a little bit of a signal check from you, this collection will work really well, or, and you could rate it at a 5, or no, it's missing the mark, it might be a 1, or somewhere in between. And then we're going to do a deep dive into sort of those 4 thematic groupings of desired outcomes to get a little bit more specificity. And I do see people have put some comments in chat already. So let's start with that first question. When you look across those desired outcomes along the bottom row of this template, how well is it going to help us achieve those that transformational goal and the 5 medium-term objectives? So Savina, maybe we'll just check in. Are we getting some results? Great, good. So we're starting to see people weigh in. If for any reason you're having trouble with Mentimeter, please just jot a note in chat. You can put your score in chat and we'll add it into the mix, or you can type in your answers as well in chat if you're having difficulty. And in chat, merci Erica, the questions are en français dans le chat, if you would like to review it there. So we'll give folks another minute or two. Hopefully you have found slide 5 from Dan's circulation this morning and have found your way to Menti. We'd like to continue to hear from folks around the room in this way.
And
so, yeah, Lo, I was going to say, Lo or Caroline, did you have anything you wanted to say about what you're starting to observe here at this very first high-level path?
Yeah. And this is where I was going to say that if people have comments, that, either raise your hand as we're going through each question, if you want to share it verbally or put it into the chat. And I see the chat function is working very well. So yeah. We're just a little bit better than halfway, I think is we're not quite hitting the mark yet. I see some are missing ambition, missing kind of pieces of the outcome, and that may be in the short-term actions below. We're trying to keep the you want to be able to say the outcome essentially in a sentence, but we'll see how we go. But thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Lo. So let's do that. Let's go to the first set of outcomes. So if you're looking back on slide 5, and you can advance on your also in your Mentimeter, but the question we have as we look at that bundle around training and capacity building, that expression of the outcome. So right now it's expressed as making sure that folks are aware of and can easily access training to use data and tools to develop solutions. So when you look at the description of that outcome, how well do you think it sort of, is it clear? Is it making sense? Is it hitting the mark? Sort of, again, a scale of 1 to 5. And then we're going to come back to you immediately after this and say, okay, what do you like? Or what would you change? So just spend a moment sort of evaluating for that first yellow box on slide 5 around training and capacity. How well do you think the statement as it's currently expressed is describing the desired outcome? Great, and so we do see some additional comments in chat, so thank you for that. Yeah, so Sabina, can you just go back to slide 5 for a second so folks can see the wording again, just in case it's not at their fingertips?
I've also posted it on the chat to kind of get there as well.
Oh, the wording is
sorry, too many screens that we need to do this at once. I can probably guess why the rating is still kind of right in that middle, and it's more than access to the training data and tools, it's applying them and knowing how to use it, I think is going to be one key factor. So that's good. Anybody else want to give commentary on this as we're giving everybody a chance to to
I see
respond?
Chris Roll has her hand up.
Okay, great, good. Thanks, Caroline. I can't see that. I guess I'm maybe not host, so thanks for that.
Yeah.
Thank you so
much. One of the things that I was noticing sort of throughout the entire document is I think it would be stronger if, as well as outcomes, there were some targets, because it seems a very processy document right now, and I think that what's really needed, especially for the short-term stuff, is if we're looking at a timetable of 3 to 5 years, is thinking, well, how do we know we're getting where we want to go, as opposed to just sort of throwing programs and throwing money out the door? What are the tangible things we want to see in place? Is it, we have a solution for orphan dams, right? Like, it just something that you can sort of say, this is what we're driving towards, and this is the measure of how we know we're getting where we want to go. And this might be a good venue to try to get some suggestions for possible short-term targets. There's a lot of really smart people in this group, so I invite you to open it up to them and think about, this is a very tight timeline for the whole national adaptation strategy. And if it comes out as just a process document, we're not doing the work we really need to do to get Canada prepared.
Absolutely, Chris. Totally agree that targets and kind of how do we know we're moving in this area? So those short-term targets, as well as a way to measure to see whether or not we're moving in that area, is going to be part of this. As part of this. So today we're just looking at the outcomes, but another part will be the target / indicator for it. Thank you.
Great. And I see Yua has a comment as well. So we'll take one more comment and then we might need to jump because we have a little bit of time crunch. Go ahead, Yua, please.
It's Eva. That's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what a lot of people have been saying in the chat about providing access isn't enough. And that has been our foremost lesson in developing the BARC methodology, building adaptive and resilient communities. When we were doing the Cross Canada Roadshow on some of the challenges with using tools and different resources that existed, municipalities always told us, well, we had a one-day workshop or training on it, and then we were left on our own to figure out how to actually apply it in our day-to-day work. And so I think we as in the practitioner community think of capacity building as just providing the resource or providing the training, and not providing the ongoing support to actually utilize those resources. You can't learn enough in a 2-hour workshop or even a one-day training module to then have it rise to the cream on your desk. So I think if we're truly thinking about capacity building, it's not just provision, it's providing ongoing support. And I think this is where we've seen some successes are in training and capacity programs that do that over the long term and not just in defined short periods of time. So I agree, and that the capacity building here needs to be defined a little bit, but then also the outcome can't be about access and awareness, it needs to be about use.
Great, good. Thanks for that, Eva. And thanks for also summarizing some of the themes that are coming through in chat. Lo and Caroline, I'm going to suggest that we move to the next set of outcomes, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead to the next question, Savina, the following one. And it looks like folks are quite comfortable entering their comments into chat, which is great. We can also put them into Menti. The next segment was around mainstreaming and guidance codes and standards. And so if you're able to, and maybe Lo, you can pop those outcome summary statements into chat as well. And again, folks, if you're following on the PowerPoint presentation, slide 5, here we were talking about 2 main themes around infrastructure owners having completed climate adapted asset management plans with the aim of taking a systems approach. And then the other piece is all new builds, retrofits, and maintenance use climate change guidance codes and standards. So there's sort of those 2 pieces that make up this set of desired outcomes. So again, kind of getting some feedback from you. How close are we in terms of mainstreaming the guidance and codes and standards? Sorry.
If I could just, while people are answering to this this question, I'd just like to answer one comment that has come back in the chat, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, is the question around, are we talking about only built infrastructure, or are these also including kind of the natural infrastructure? For us, it is implicit. It does include the natural infrastructure, but if you feel that there is something missing in the language, or that it seems too oriented towards built infrastructure, to just let us know that. But when we spoke about this and we worked with the team, for us, we are talking about resilient built and natural infrastructure. So that's kind of implicit in the actions that were mentioned. I just wanted to add that.
Great, thank you. So maybe what we'll do is we'll shift to the next question, and there you can type in your responses in terms of, as you look at that grouping under mainstreaming and guidance standards and codes, what changes would you recommend, or are there things that resonate really well for you? So what's working in the way the desired outcomes are currently scripted and shaped, and or what gaps or further clarification is needed? So you can put the question in comment into chat, or you can also use Mentimeter to type in your answers here, so that we have an idea of what's resonating. And please indicate that this works well, I like this, or I would change, or I would like some clarification on this. So I'll give folks another minute to sort of drop in comments into Mentimeter or comments into chat. So there's a couple comments coming in through Mentimeter. Again, feel free to jot your thoughts down here. The piece on not consulted widely, if you've got further clarification or like to help us understand that a little bit more, please do. And thanks also for the comments around the balance between physical hazard adaptation versus the low carbon resilience. Okay, so some suggestions on reworking the objectives versus the short-term actions.
Common theme of mandating codes and standards.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, just as a general comment, what I think I'm seeing or hearing here, although some of the comments indeed might require a bit more details, but what we seem to be hearing is that around the table, we feel that the language may not be strong enough. So I think there's something there that's kind of along all of the actions where we want something that's a bit more concrete, not just providing the access, but making sure that people are accessing it and support is provided, or mandating, making sure that codes and standards are applied rather than just having them available. So as a general comment, kind of along all of the actions, that's what I'm seeing so far. But I am curious about the not consulted widely comment, if there's any way to add any specificity to that.
I did notice an additional comment, Caroline, that may speak to it, and feel free, folks, if you want to put up your hands and add more, but there was a piece, maybe Savina could just scroll down a little bit more, indicating that it might be helpful a little bit further to talk to citizens whose houses and livelihoods have been destroyed due to extreme weather. perhaps that maybe I'm just guessing with the anonymity, but perhaps that's a consideration in terms of who to speak to gather some additional insight. Great. Okay, so let's go on to the third grouping, which is the piece around capital investment support. So if you're following along on the your slide 5, you'll see two pieces. One, that funding has mandatory resilience requirements and prioritization is based on risks, benefits, and equity. And then resilient infrastructure planning, development, and maintenance is a priority with long-term stable funding from multiple sources. So we seem to have, we're a little bit out of step here, I think, with some of our captures, but I'm looking forward to your input here.
We're trying to distinguish between these two goals. One being that the funding, there's long-term stable funding available from multiple sources. And the other one is that the funding has resilient requirements and the prioritization of where that funding goes is kind of that second piece.
I think Eva has a question.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, and maybe we'll turn to Eva. Maybe what we'll do is shift folks over to the place where they can write comments to help us understand sort of what's working in this suite of desired outcomes and what might need to be changed. So Eva, feel free to jump into the conversation, and others, please go ahead and provide your comments.
Sorry, I could have just provided in the comments, but I posted it in the chat earlier, and I think it ties between training and capacity building and the funding piece, which is around training of procurers and the folks who do public procurement to require that the tenders they put out also allow for innovation and resilience and low carbon infrastructure. Because I think we focus our training capacity building around the practitioners, the engineers and folks doing this work, and we focus it around the funding envelopes to acquire them, but we don't really do much for the procurement community, and those are the people who are producing the tenders. And if those requirements aren't in the tenders, the vendors won't build them into their response. So I don't know where that fits, whether it's in capacity building or funding, because it's the kind of nexus between the two of them. But I just wanted to make sure that that gets captured somehow.
Yeah, great. On the procurement side. Yeah.
It looks like there's a question from Robert. Did you want to go ahead and jump into the conversation, Robert?
Yeah, hi, thanks. Just on that point, I think it's important to just to be consistent in terms of what we're talking about when we talk about life cycle of infrastructure as well. I think we talked about the planning and the operation, the capital investments, and then the operation and maintenance. But I think it would be worthwhile to use common terms here, where we talk about planning, procurement, just to go to Eva's point, construction, operation, maintenance, and also the decommissioning. So I think all phases of infrastructure investments need to be looked at, not just the three that were identified.
Great, thanks for that, Robert. Lo or Carolyn, anything in response to what you're seeing here on the screen or in chat?
Well, just maybe the point about the coordinated aspect to add to help describe the funding. I think that was, maybe we lost some of that language along the way, but it was definitely discussed within the advisory table group, the need for that, and the need for also to maybe have the funding or the programs help to kind of motivate collaboration between if we're thinking of infrastructure in terms of services and we're trying to provide services to communities, maybe it's more efficient to be looking at ways to have communities work together or collaborate together to get those infrastructure services. So definitely something along the lines of coordinated funding, but also funding that helps to encourage or foster collaboration between partners. I just wanted to add that. For the rest, there's a lot of comments coming in through the chat. I'm not sure I'm able to analyze this and provide feedback right away on it.
Why don't we move to the last one, Barb?
Yep, for sure. Let's do that. And the last one is on governance. And so there's a couple of components around the governance outcomes in checking in on having clear responsibilities, as well as having management plans using the systems approach to risk. And so as you think about the way that desired outcome is crafted, think about the importance of governance as it relates to achieving the objectives and the transformational goal. How well is it shaped? And then we'll switch here to have some comments on ways that it might be improved or gaps that need to be addressed.
The key words here is that there's a common vision, clear roles and responsibilities, and coordinated or aligning our priorities across essentially everybody that's involved. So we may not have captured everybody in there, but trying to list it.
Great, and thanks, Lo, for also putting it in chat if people are looking to refresh on the wording for this one.
Yeah. It's in there.
So let's shift over to get some of your analysis and your commentary around governance and the statements that are there. And then we'll do just one final step back to see sort of, now that we've done a little bit of a deep dive, what else is missing. So any thoughts in terms of gaps or further clarification needed as we work on describing the governance desired outcome? Or are there particular components of that description that work well for you?
I'm wondering, David Lapp, if you want to say any of your comments that you've been putting into chat, do you want to share some of that? I should say that the outcomes are in no particular order. So
okay, so that addresses the group 2 and group 3 piece, right?
Yeah.
Good.
And I do also note that through several of the comments coming in through the chat that we should be explicit about natural systems. I think we need to add that language maybe a bit more and not take it for granted that people will just assume that that's what we're talking about. So I think we've heard that as well.
Right. And there's a theme coming up about coordinating with multiple levels of government and different orders of government as a piece of this as well. Right. And it seems sort of a theme that this one seems fairly high level, so it might be something to revisit. There's a few comments about this one maybe being a little hard to ground. So I don't know, Lo or Caroline, if you have thoughts about that and sort of the story behind this governance piece.
Really around alignment and coordination. And so the question is just, we've heard, the the misalignment therefore hard for municipalities to get the funds and the resources to work on resilience. And then the question of, is it a federal role, government, provincial or territorial or municipal role, or the individual asset owner, and who is that asset owner? It varies across the country as well. But yeah, I think overall what I'm hearing is we need to do a little more work on these outcome statements to add, in one sense, add precision, in another sense to kind of go deeper as well, to be more ambitious and maybe more specific. And then, yeah, I think what will help with these are the short-term goals. So that's what we've been struggling with. We've got pages and pages of short-term goals that we're trying to kind of line up and figure out, like, what are these goals? What are these short-term actions trying to get to? And I'm pretty sure we haven't gotten there yet by kind of the comments that we've received here today, and that's fine. It is definitely a work in progress. We wanted to bring this out to you early. We actually haven't brought it even back to our advisory group yet. That is in not next week, but the week after. But we wanted to test it out and see if it was resonating with a group of, that is working on buildings and infrastructure. And we do want this national adaptation strategy to kind of speak common language, but be understandable and not just at the 10,000 foot level. So we haven't quite gotten there. I think this is my conclusion from this engagement session that we've gotten so far.
Great, thanks, Lo. We did have one more question that's sort of any additional. Would you like us to go to that and see, like, there's certainly ideas coming up in chat about things that could be added or addressed. Would you like to just shift to that for a few minutes, Lo, before we move to close the session?
Yeah, let's go there.
Okay, great. Savina, do you mind just taking us to the next question? So, and we've started to see this come up, any additional outcomes that you might propose? What gaps still persist when you look at the suite that's sort of being drafted for consideration? What else might you offer for potential outcomes? So for instance, innovation, I think has come up as one idea. Does that fit in somewhere? And if there are a procurement, perhaps the link with procurement and so on that was spoken to. If you have any suggestions about additional outcomes, feel free to jot them in chat or share them here through Menti.
Or maybe even the buckets. So the kind of the 4 buckets that we put in is, there needs to be some kind of alignment around governance and coordination. There needs to be support, availability, prioritization of funding, and kind of making mandatory resilience requirements attached to the funding and as Eva said, procurement. The number 2 was the action, taking action in the asset management plan. And I think we've heard go further than just the planning, but the actual implementation and maintenance. And then that code standards guidance is going to play a role in making that move. And then the first piece that we talked about was the capacity, that the tools and the information is there, but also the capacity to use and apply it. So those are kind of the 4 areas that we thought we can play with the outcomes in terms of rewarding them, making sure we've got the language concise, clear, specific. But have we missed something? And that's kind of what I'm worried about, that we're too deep in the weeds and we've totally lost it. I heard the connection between, and it is, we need to be more explicit on the natural infrastructure, got that. I saw a bunch of comments as well around connection to biodiversity, connection to low carbon resilience as we're going about low carbon in the materials as we're going about resilience work.
I think, Lo, that I'm also reading about how we're not explicit enough about some of the items. I think there's research and development that's appearing here, I think in the advisory table discussions, there was always this notion that all decisions are based on sound research, that we continue to invest in research and we continue to learn from observations and an assessment of how things are performing, but we don't actually say it anywhere. So I think there's maybe something along the lines of being more explicit. While we're trying to keep this short, we want to make sure that these things are read. And that just brings me to maybe the last point I wanted to make is that it is a big challenge. There are several things that need to be done. And we're just trying to make sure that we identify key things that need to be done, that really need to be done, that will have an impact, but where we don't get lost in too many actions that nobody can track or nobody can implement just because there are too many. So there's a real balance that we're trying to achieve here in terms of making sure that we're identifying the right and most impactful actions to help get us to the medium-term objectives and eventually to the transformational goal. So, but we don't want to miss out on anything. So we want to make sure that we have all of those key items.
Yeah, like the research and development, the development of tools, the continuing to study and kind of come up with future climate data, that's all under the training capacity, essentially with the intent of doing all of that to make sure that we have the best tools and people can apply and use them. So yeah, there's definitely more beneath each one of these. And that's probably the problem that we're having of putting up lists and lists of actions. We're trying to group them and try to state what are we trying to get at with that list of action. But that's good. So this is very useful. I know we're coming up on time. Maybe I'll just, well, Carolyn, you'll probably say it in your closing remarks. So I'm going to turn it back to you.
Barb, did you have anything to add before I go to closing remarks?
No, I'm just wondering if you want me to just go back to the main screen, shut down Menti. I just wanted to see how best to set you up for finishing off the session, and just thank you to folks for kind of being nimble and working with us on providing this content to help out the team working on this pillar. So over to you.
Well, thank you. And just to let everyone know, we will be taking the information that we gathered today. We will be taking all of the comments in the chat because there's a lot of information there that can help us. I just wanted to thank everyone for your active participation. We really appreciate this feedback, and we know that you appreciate the challenge in coming up with this. So, but we do appreciate your expertise and your own experience and what kind of rises to the top for you. So thank you for your time, your expertise, and your engagement in this discussion. We have a Google document that is open for your comments until this Friday. We will actually make it available a bit longer. If you can get comments back to us by Friday, that would be appreciated. If you really want to comment, but it's not possible for you this week, please just contact us or somebody from the team, and we'll see how we can keep getting your feedback beyond that deadline. And we'd also like to remind you that the public engagement platform is open until July 15th. You can provide additional comments on short-term actions for the broader advice of the National Adaptation Strategy. So that includes the resilient built and natural infrastructure, but also the other themes that we're working on. So please go to that platform if you wish to provide comments. And with that, that completes our session in this meeting, and I'll turn it back to Catherine and Dan.
Great. Thanks for that great engagement session, and thanks for all the participants today. Couldn't have done it without you. Really nice to have some frank feedback on that. And so thanks to the presenters and the people who gave updates. I hope everyone found it useful. And like Dan said at the beginning, we'll circulate some notes from the resources and whatnot that were put in the chat. Again, a reminder, reach out if you have any topics that you'd like to see at our future meeting in October. And stay tuned, we may be having a special meeting on the update of the Infrastructure and Buildings Working Group State of Play report. Over to you, Dan, if you have any final words.
No, nothing much more to add. Thanks, Catherine, and thanks everyone for joining. A reminder, please do send a presentation or discussion ideas anytime. Our next scheduled meeting is October 4th, but we'd be happy, I think, if there are pressing issues, if there's a need to reconvene this discussion as well. I think the IBWG is at the disposal of those Lo and Caroline or anybody else involved in this process for this kind of discussion. I think this is kind of a unique group. We have a wide breadth of participation, including industry organizations and that sort of thing. But please, at any time, feel free to recommend ideas. And thanks again. We had a great turnout and great discussion. And I think this is a great forum for other topics like the National Adaptation Strategy, topics where you need input from a wide group. Please let us know, and I think we'll be at your disposal.